Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome back to another episode. In today's episode, we are chatting to Taylor Mendelawitz. She is a past Thrive Academy client. She worked with me for about 6 months and completely healed her relationship with herself and also with food. She has now gone on to have an incredible 6 months since finishing our coaching container, and I brought her onto the podcast today with me to chat all things body image, relationship to self, and how her entire life has completely changed since working together and healing her relationship with food. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the episode. Taylor, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to finally have you on after what has it been a year now since we've been working together? Like since we've stopped working together?
I think it's been a little under that, but I feel like I came on board probably just over a year ago now. So how nice it is to be closing the loop and speaking to you today.
That's actually a full circle moment. You're exactly right. It was the first week of October last year. Yep.
Incredible. So no, really excited to be here.
So excited. There's so many things I want to chat to you about today. But the first one is I kind of wanted to share why I actually wanted to have you on the podcast at all, because no one can come and work with me just out of the blue. Like, we always have to have a clarity call. And you were one of those women that jumped on the clarity calls, and I could already sense this sense of self-awareness and depth where you, and we can chat through this, but you had already tried so many different things and you were so aware that you had to give it one last crack. And I would love to hear you like just kind of speak to, firstly, maybe let's chat through the place you were in before actually coming across my content, coming across the clarity call, before you and I actually connected. Chat to us about what your relationship with food and just how you were going. What did that really look like?
Great question. And I think as well, like, this is one of the things that I really relate to when I hear different people talk about healing their relationship with food. And I guess one of the things that I really resonate when you hear other people's stories. So happy to be sharing that. So honestly, if I think back to when I was a little kid, and this is me having done the work to be able to get here and reflect back on that, I remember having moments, even when I was about 9, where I'd be looking at other girls, sort of comparing myself to them and how pretty they were, and sort of feeling some of those insecurities, which I think sort of laid the foundation around how I thought about my body, how I sort of had this mentality towards food and the impact food would have on how I look. And pretty incredible to think that it would start at such a young age when social media wasn't really a thing back then. But we did have the likes of magazines and things like that was equally, I guess, influential. So I sort of take it back to then. And I also remember particular moments just growing up in my household. I have a really close relationship with my parents and I have a brother. But my mum in particular is this beautiful woman who I absolutely idolize. And you know, I'd have friends and family members always commenting on how my mum looks and how much of a ray of sunshine she is, and being this beautiful person who's in everyone's life. So I sort of idolized her and modeled myself on her in a lot of ways, unintentionally and subconsciously. But I would remember some things, like I'd come home from school and, you know, this is all coming from a good place from her part, but I'd go straight to the fridge to have, you know, a chocolate biscuit for afternoon tea, or I'd know that there'd be ice cream in the freezer. And because I love sweets, I'd go straight for that as that afternoon snack. And, you know, coming from a mother's perspective, she'd say things to me like, oh, look, I don't think you need that. You know, if you're about to do your homework, why don't you have something that actually is going to give you enough energy, something that's going to set you up for success to be able to get through the afternoon? And obviously that's coming from a really great place. But I think over time, things like that start to build up, and being a young kid, you sort of take those things on board without knowing the full intent or the correct intent behind it. And it does start to manifest. And again, like, didn't have that perspective towards those comments early on. But I think as I've gotten older and reflected on those, like, I think that's sort of where a lot of the foundation around my relationship with food started. So fast forward to then sort of high school and, you know, early 20s. I had a relationship that didn't end well, and it's quite funny. I feel like a lot of us go through breakups that end up sort of resulting in poor eating habits and bad relationships with food. But I remember that time I was so fixated on wanting to get him back. I was, so determined to lose weight and look a certain way and make him feel like he, was missing out on something. And that's when I went through this particular phase of restricting what I was eating. And I think up until that point, my relationship with food was okay. I think just sort of typical teenage mentality, you do think you can kind of eat what you want, but then when you do that, it doesn't necessarily leave you feeling all that great. So I think it was a constant juggle of how I felt towards food then. But then going through this breakup, that restriction period really took its toll after a certain amount of time. As we know, we're not getting enough calories we need. I'm cutting out specific food groups that I love, and being a dessert and sweet person, I really missed those types of food. And so when it gets to that point where your body, well, you don't know at the time, but your body knows it can't keep restricting, you then have a taste for something like a small Freddo or, a handful of potato chips, and your body and your mind is just like, oh my God, wow, this tastes so good. Mm-hmm. And that sort of led to some of those binge eating tendencies where I was like, oh my God, I haven't had this in ages. I need to keep eating this. This tastes amazing. And then it sort of got to a point where you'd eat to the point of feeling sick, and it would be, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that. That didn't feel so good. But then because you're still trying to restrict, you keep coming back to that pattern of behavior. And then it would get to a point where I'd be like, oh, okay, this I don't think is normal. Maybe I need to do this in quiet or with people not around me. So that would start to be something that I did on my own. And then because it didn't feel right and it felt like I was doing something with this guilt hanging over me, I'd scoff it down even faster because I just wanted it to be done with. And I think a lot of us can relate to that sort of binge eating mentality. And I think that's where it all started. And back then, binge eating wasn't talked about. It wasn't labeled as anything. So I felt so isolated, thinking that no one else is going through this. And it's not something back then that I would have really spoken openly about with my girlfriends. Fast forward to now, that's a different story, but I really did feel alone. And to be honest, that cycle just went on for years. That probably went on for, 10, 12 years. And you'd go through patches that felt a little bit better than others, but it was always this underlying feeling, and a feeling that really came between relationships, friendships, family. I'd go out for dinner and I would take my own food because I'd still have this element of wanting to restrict because I knew that there'd probably be a binge pattern that would rear up later throughout the week. And sometimes it really did become, okay, when am I going to schedule that binge? Because I know I'm going to be really good up until that point, and then I can let go. And I think when I think about binge eating for me, it really took hold in different shapes and forms across that 10 to 12 year period. And I really just wasn't happy within myself. And I think back to all the moments that I had negative self-talk and I really put myself down, and I'd be crying and really taking it out on other people in my life. It actually took away some of those formative years of me growing up and having fun. And that's something that I regret and look back on and feel really disappointed about. But to be able to get to where I am now, I feel really proud to have done that, and we'll touch on that. But I guess in terms of seeking help throughout those years, I really knew that something was not right, and I tried all the things. I went through I wouldn't say I went through different diets, but to me, it was trying to get help so I wouldn't demonize foods. I think for me, that was the issue. I always looked at good foods and bad foods for me were the sweets, and trying to articulate that to different people. No one really understood. So when I did seek help, that was looking like psychologists. It was looking like speaking to nutritionists, dietitians, And everyone had their own method and approach around what binge eating looked like and the different strategies and methods that I should try. And nothing worked, like absolutely nothing worked. And to be honest, I sort of felt like I was wasting these people's time, thinking that my issues weren't large enough to sort of warrant seeking such professional help. And, you know, sometimes they made me feel that way, and sometimes it probably was in my head. But I never felt like anyone could really support me or give me the help that I needed. So bringing that to you, I think I had just gotten back from a holiday in New Zealand where I'd been away for 2 weeks, and I had really tried to enjoy myself, you know, let go of the fear of not being able to eat, cook my own food, let go of the fear of eating whatever I wanted. And I had a great holiday because I was adamant that I was going to stick to that mentality. But I came back and I just did not feel like myself. And I hated myself for putting on a couple of kilos and really having the time of my life, but I didn't see it that way. And I remember listening to one of your podcasts, the episode where you talked a little bit about your journey, which you tend to do quite often, which is great. But it just resonated with me. And I think it was the first time where someone had shared that experience, which I hadn't heard verbally. And I just knew that you going through that lived experience yourself could add this value to my life that no one had been able to do in a professional sense. And I remember instantly booking that clarity call with you. And I think a couple of days later, we jumped on the phone, and I knew as soon as I heard your voice, it was like this calm just came over me. And again, I shared my story with you. You just understood, and I just felt heard and listened to. And I knew, like I genuinely knew that I was going to overcome all these years of struggles around food, which is pretty incredible because no one has made me feel that way before.
I literally have goosebumps just listening to you, because so many different trains of thought I want to go down right now. But I just want to say thank you to you, firstly, number one, for sharing that. But secondly, thank you to past Taylor that didn't give up. Look at where you are now. Like, is that not just so worthy of looking back at that past version of you and being like, you are an absolute amazing person?
100%. And I think, you know, for so long, I thought to myself, I'm never going to get to a place where I feel like I'm in control of this or I'm content. And past me would never have thought that. So to be able to talk about it now, like, you know, there is so much hope for anyone going through this. And I just really encourage people to keep going, because you sort of get to this point where you feel like you're at breaking point multiple times and you tell yourself, this is the last time I'm going to do this. But until you actually find the right person to be able to hear you out, listen to you, and relate to you, I don't necessarily think you get to that point. And that's why, like, I'm so grateful to be on here today talking about our relationship and the work that we've done, because I truly feel like it can help other people.
So special. Why do you think that nothing else worked? If you think back to all the dietitians, nutritionists, all the stuff, like exactly what you were mentioning, they're all great in their fields. Why do you think it didn't work when it came to getting you back to feeling in control?
I genuinely think it's them not having the lived experience. And I think it's coming from a clinical background, which is great. And don't get me wrong, they serve a purpose in their fields. And as you say, what they do is great. But until you have someone who's been through it themselves, there's that added layer and added level of insight that they just can't give you. And I think at times I felt really stupid explaining what I've been through and some of those moments. And I felt really quite insignificant being in those rooms with these people or on these telehealth calls talking about how I ate too much food. And that's how it came across, you know, and I felt myself lying, you know. I felt guilty about saying, you know, I just had 1.5 blocks of chocolate, a pint of Ben and Jerry's, and then I finished off a packet of chocolate-covered Scotch fingers. Like, I honestly had to sort of dial it back. I didn't feel like I could be honest in those conversations And that's what those sessions are for. You have to be honest to be able to move forward and overcome. And I just couldn't do that. And so I really do think going through it with someone who has that relatability is like no other.
That's such an important thing you've just mentioned there, that how can we expect ourselves to learn how to be transparent with ourselves when we can't even feel like we can be transparent with a health professional? And then that gets further ingrained, right? If we're feeling like we're already holding shame because morally we already know that, you know, I already know that I'm eating 4 days worth of food in 4 hours or whatever it looks like. Like we're already very aware of that. But then if we feel like we can't bring that to a space and for that to be held as very valid and very just safe to be said, where your behavior gets to be separated from like your sense of self-worth and for who you actually are, you can actually separate them and have someone help you unpack the behavior, knowing that that's not actually you. If you don't feel safe to do that, right, we end up lying. I absolutely did the exact same thing. I lied through my teeth and then would go home and I'd be battling this internal battle of trying not to lie to myself, but then also being like, okay, well, I don't feel safe to kind of share it in this space. And then you end up holding so much shame. And then what do you do with the shame? You end up eating your feelings. And the same cycle starts again.
And I remember some of the things or some of the tactics and strategies that were shared with me, you know, oh, well, just don't buy those types of food, or maybe don't go out for dinner as many times that week, or look, maybe start bringing your own food here and there to some of those outings so you can still go to them, but, you know, you're then sort of managing the food that you're eating. And looking back on that, I'm like, how is that sustainable? Like, actually tell me what the root problem is here. Like, why am I doing this? Because really you're just facilitating this thought in my head that is saying the food is the problem, and that's not it at all. And I think that's the key message around all of this is there's so much more to unpack there than the food. The food is not the problem. And that's where I think a lot of those people go wrong, unfortunately.
100%. If you think about when we jumped off that clarity call, did you have the fear of trying like one last time and giving it your all?
No, I didn't. Like, this is going to sound so silly, but I felt a connection with you on that call. And there was a gut feeling inside me that thought this could really be it. And there was an element of hope. And I think it was hope that I hadn't really had before. I think going to these other sorts of professionals, I always felt somewhat let down. And because I had seen so many of them, going to another clinical professional, it was like, oh, I don't know really if they're going to solve my issues, but we'll give it another go. But for you, because you had that lived experience on that clarity call, you were able to sort of almost like play a tennis match with me. Like every time I'd say something, you'd say something that would just sort of like make so much sense, or just felt right. Because I had that hope. There was a part of me that really thought this could be it. And I hadn't felt that way in a long time. And look, I don't know, for some people probably, you know, go through these conversations or these clarity calls with multiple other women. But I think we've talked about this before. I think you have to get to a point where you truly feel that gut feeling before you can do something about it, or you have to be truly ready to do something about it. And perhaps when I did have those other sessions with other professionals, as much as I felt ready, there probably was an element where I wasn't, or I hadn't reached that maturity level or that sort of awareness to realize, okay, this is genuinely no longer serving me anymore. And I realize how much of my life I have missed out on because of these binge eating tendencies. Like, I genuinely need to do something about this. Otherwise, I'm going to seriously hurt myself. And I think there needs to be that catalyst that comes into play where you genuinely feel like enough is enough. Because there are those moments, but I think there does come a particular point where it's like, right, I've got to do this for me.
Absolutely. And I think speaking to that word that you just used of hope, I think is a really important thing to just pause on there, because without a doubt, that is the biggest killer of binge-free lives, is people not having any more hope. And I think when people don't have hope, and for everyone listening, if you don't have hope, what I hear from that is that you somehow think that you're broken. You somehow think that there's something wrong with you. And so you've lost hope because you feel like you've tried everything, and now you've internalized the everything, thinking that you're the problem, that you are broken, you are fundamentally different. And this then speaks to the whole like lucky girl syndrome of then looking at everyone else being like, oh, she's so lucky or whatever it might be, and realizing that no, you actually also get to have the results that you want, but it does take a degree of effort. But being able to really recognize that you are not broken. And I think that's where you have to, you know, whether that's me, whether that's a different coach, whether it's whoever, being able to connect with someone and feel heard, feel valued, feel safe, feel seen, and genuinely feel supported, not only having the right strategy, but then having a space where you're like, I actually feel like there is that connection is without a doubt the most important thing. And just finally on that, it's so important that, you know, even in terms of speaking about being ready, it's also about being able to see the fear and feel ready at the same time, but also still see the fear. Like the fear is okay to have. I don't think anyone ever gets to a point where you're like, oh my God, best decision ever. This is going to be like, you're always going to be like, holy crap, this is nerve wracking, because you're trying something new. Like if anything that you're trying is new and it doesn't feel edgy and it doesn't feel like a bit of a push, then you've probably done it before and it probably hasn't worked. So it's like, literally that fear is showing you that this is something new and this could actually be a good thing.
And I think with that element of fear too, I think when you know you're ready to address it, there's an element of excitement around it too. And I remember that, like there was hope there was fear there, but because I had that hope, it was like, this is somewhat exciting. Like I could really be in a better place in 3, 6, 12 months time. And I think acknowledging too that, or being in a place to recognize that it is not an overnight fix. You've got to put in the work, but the work is the most rewarding part because it's not a linear journey by any means. And I think like we're genuinely special people, like people who have disordered eating patterns, like we go through so much and we're constantly taking an inward look. Like I can't tell you the countless amount of times where I'd have these conversations with myself and I'd go internal and be like, what are you doing, Taylor? Like, come on. And, you know, you try to talk yourself out of it. But I think because you spend so much time internally, you have this emotional awareness about you. And to be able to then sort of recognize, okay, well, the journey for me to date certainly hasn't been linear because I've been doing this for months, years, whatever it might be, then I know that the journey to quote unquote recovery, which I don't agree with, is not going to be linear anyway. And I think recognizing that is also sort of one step closer to getting to a point where you can do this because you're sort of accepting the fact that you've got to put in the work and you're going to get there. So I think that's sort of part of the process as well, knowing when you are truly ready to take it on and really hit it on the head.
100%. And I think I think everyone has, varying moments of that, but I do think it's being able to like get to this point where you're like, okay, the amount of effort that I'm putting in, I'm not actually getting the best return on investment on all of this energy, and going, there has to be a better way. Like there actually has to be a better way than me noticing, if I look back, okay, I've been in the same cycle for a year, for 4 years, for 8 years, for some people it's like 30 years, going, I've tried to lose the same 5 kilos and I'm still stuck in the same eating pattern. Like I'm still self-berating starting every Monday. And it's like you eventually get to a point where you can start being like, whoa, can I see that pattern? And what you just said there in terms of like being like special people, I absolutely agree with that. I think it just made me think of those reels that I feel like they're popping up on a lot on my Instagram at the moment that are like, yes, I feel deeply. And it's like someone crying, but then it's also like you like holding hands and cuddling with your family and like running in a park and all this stuff. And it's being able to be like, we are emotional people. Like I'm without a doubt one of the most emotional people I know, but it's about harnessing those emotions and being like, you're allowed to feel deeply. You're allowed to find things challenging. You're allowed to literally be a human that feels big feelings. But it's being able then, and that then speaks to obviously like what tends to happen with binging is that we end up kind of holding those up, feeling shame, all the things, as opposed to like learning how to feel them and then actually learning how to express them and harness them. So that like, you're being an emotional person is actually a beautiful, beautiful character trait. Being introspective is a beautiful character trait. But if you don't know how to harness it and you don't know how to get curious instead of self-berating, then it can obviously become quite toxic as well.
Definitely. And like, you know, your comment around being emotional and being able to feel all the things, like what a privilege that is to be able to be that type of person. I mean, some people don't have that ability to be able to cry, to really sort of look deeply or feel deeply. And I think, you know, we're lucky in that regard. But being able to channel those emotions then in the right way, as you say, I think is critical. So yeah, I agree with that.
I love. Did you find that coaching was different than what you expected? Like your idea of having a coach, was it different?
Yes. I think it's because I think the coaching aspect digs far deeper. And I never felt like as well that I was wasting your time. Like being a coach, I think sort of the underlying foundation there is having this sort of, you know, one-to-one relationship with someone, whether that be, you know, in a one-to-one setting or even in a group setting. Like I feel like you are heard and you are listened to, and there's that relatability there, and just understanding your story in a way that I think other professionals can't necessarily offer. So I think it's different in that regard. But I genuinely didn't really know what to expect coming into working with you. But I think because that initial clarity call really gave me that connection to you, like I didn't really have any expectations, and I was okay with that because I just genuinely felt like this could really be the next thing for me that sort of sets me up for success in the long run.
Love that so much. So I think that is one of the most critical things I think there's missing when it comes to, again, like loose with that term like recovery, but you know, that when we speak about healing our relationship with food and healing our relationship with ourselves and deepening all of that, being actually able to be in a space where you feel like your thoughts, your crazy food thoughts and your crazy food behaviors are actually valid, like they're not crazy, and that you're not crazy, and that you can share them. And it kind of, I mentioned it before, but like your behavior is actually separate to the values that you hold and the morals that you have and what you truly know you want to be doing in terms of actually taking care of your physical, mental, emotional health. Your behaviors are out of alignment with that, but then you're not being judged on just your behavior alone. You're actually able to bring your behavior to the table and be like, yo, I did this thing. I'm not quite sure why I did it. Can you help me unpack? And being able then to pull apart, right? Think about how many sessions, Taylor, like we literally would have a look at the certain behavior and pull that apart from a place of pure curiosity to then get to like, oh, interesting. It was this one thought, this one emotion that was at the roots of it. And that kind of leads me to, in terms of our coaching experience together, if we think about what you thought the binge eating issue initially was, what do you then feel as though was the main issue even if we just sort of start surface level?
So over the years, I was led to believe that the issue was sweet food and how I demonized them. So that dichotomy thinking around good and bad.
Like Kit Kat being bad, protein bar being good, or exactly. Protein bar being good, yes.
Or those bloody Cadbury chocolate melts that I have in my cupboard, like, God, they got the better of me multiple times. But what we started to unpack was the fact that there were certain moments in my life where I would feel heightened, and there were certain triggers around that. Like I remember in particular, one for me was work, and this element of not feeling like I was being stimulated enough or utilized to my potential. And I would find that when I was working from home and I would feel those moments, I would automatically be drawn to the pantry, and that would just fuel this fire where I'd just go and eat that day. Or if there were days where I just didn't feel comfortable with how I looked, I mean, that automatically made me feel terrible within myself. And I sort of felt like there was no hope. And the solution for me was, well, if I feel this way, food's probably going to make me feel better, because it did in a lot of ways. Like it was that instant gratification, and it gave me that satisfaction or that relief that I wasn't able to find elsewhere. So realizing those triggers for me, I think, was really important, and it helped me unpack that it actually wasn't the food. Food became the coping mechanism, but there were things that led me to it, and those emotions that led me to it. And I think that ties into the point that you were talking about earlier. How do we then harness those emotions so I don't automatically lean on food to help give me that release or that relief? And I think that was probably the biggest eye-opener for me.
So powerful what you just said, right? And you know, this is the crux of everything within Thrive, right? Is being able to see that we tend to believe, or we've been told all through all our past attempts at trying to focus just on food, that we think the food's the issue. And for sure, maybe we're restricting a little bit. Maybe we have demonized some foods, and every time we had them, we then feel bad and all the things. But it's like, that is literally a third. If we think about, like a 3-pillar approach, that's literally like a very small portion of what we want to be focusing on. But so many people, that's all they focus on. And then no wonder, taking a more intuitive approach, or even if you then decide to count calories or whatever it looks like, you end up just going straight back to the same behavior. Because what's going to happen when it's a Friday night, you're home from a stressful week at work, and you have an open bag of melts, and you're like, oh, well, screw it, I feel so overwhelmed, I deserve this. But then you end up binging, and off the back of that, you're like, that didn't do anything for me. I didn't actually solve the fact that I'm feeling really stressed. If now I've just 10x'd that feeling, and now I'm going to bed 10 times more stressed because now I've got a whole day of restriction ahead of me.
Definitely. And I think like there were those triggers, right? But then it's sort of tuning in with your body to know what sort of comes up for you or shows up for you during those moments and what that feels like. Because from there, like, it wasn't just work for me. It wasn't just how I felt within my body that day. There then became like other markers or other things that would then sort of set me off that I hadn't necessarily discovered. But I was able to identify those based on how my body was reacting or how I felt towards something. And I think that's then when, based on some of the work that we did, I could really recognize how I felt really uncomfortable and how I started to walk towards the pantry or started thinking about food and how I thought, oh, food could make me feel better in this situation. When then I'd look back on, the experience I had with managing those situations around work and how I felt towards my body on certain days, and realize that I could actually move through this particular feeling, and it wasn't food making me feel this way. So that, I think, was really important too, because it sort of ties back to how binge eating took different sort of shapes and molds for me over the years. I was then able to sort of see how different situations in my life were also taking different shapes and mold, and how it was leading to binge eating.
Absolutely. Really, really important thing to note there. And I think if we then think to that emotional response and being able to like notice these moments now where we were feeling stressed, we were feeling heightened, we were feeling not good in our skin, and then feeling like we were self-berating, or seeing social media and thinking like going to the comparison trap, all these things that could have been triggers. Because I know that so many people listening are probably thinking, well, how do you catch yourself in that moment? Like how did you have the awareness to then be like, whoa, like, if you can you shed some light on, like, was that really challenging at the beginning, and how did that become more normal for you?
There were a couple of things that I think really worked for me, and I think one thing that I started doing right from the beginning was sort of identifying that feeling and labeling it. Or calling it out as something. And look, some of the work that we've done is, and I think has added so much value to my journey, is understanding sort of the science or the reality behind why we binge eat, being around our limbic system. See, it stuck with me. That inner child coming out. And before you and I had started working together, I had sort of called out this side of myself, which was this binge eating side of myself, as I called her Tully. And Tully would come out in these moments, and I didn't really know how to handle her until you and I started working together, and you actually, created that relevance, because it's like, well, it is your inner child, and it is this different version of myself. And some people have told me, based on the professionals that I worked with, that isn't a healthy approach and I shouldn't do that. But I did sort of find that it was working for me, because I knew that binge eating Taylor wasn't me. It really wasn't me. It felt foreign. It felt like this black thing coming over me, and like I was a shell of a human. So I thought labeling it as something was able to really sort of call her out. And so doing that and knowing sort of the reason behind that based on the work we did was scary. But it was a really good starting point for me, because it disassociated binge eating from myself, and it meant that I wasn't creating this identity around myself that was a binge eater. So that was quite a useful thing.
Super powerful with that, because I think that's a really important thing to distinguish, because it's being able to recognize that, there's two trains of thought here. The first one being that so important to recognize that there's literally different parts of your brain that are firing in those moments, right? There's literally neural pathways in your brain that are firing, which is why it feels very difficult to stay super, 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 super aware at the beginning. Like, it's very hard, right? And we literally feel as though we do disassociate, and like that's the feeling, and everyone listening, like, off the back of a binge, right, you start feeling like, why the heck did I do that? Like, that is not what I wanted to do. And you know that you made the decision to do that, but you're also kind of, at a loss for, why did I just have 4 bags of popcorn? Like, that's not what I wanted to do at all. But you're also aware that you chose to do that. So this, and then, this is where, and then the second train of thought there is then also recognizing that, with having that label, and I know that a lot of people in the eating disorder space, right, they'll label their anorexia, they'll label like their binge side. And that's something that I don't agree with, because it's when we label it, right, we almost can externalize, or we like name it something different. We almost externalize it so much that then people get avoidant of their own responsibility. So like, oh, that wasn't really me though. And it's like, we have to land in the middle to recognize that, yes, there are literally neural pathway changes and chemistry changes that are happening in your brain, which is why it feels difficult to stay really cognitively aware. But that's the part that we then need to strengthen, so that you feel really in control in that moment. And eventually that just becomes super automatic that you stay aware. But then also taking responsibility to be like, this is still me making this choice. Like, there's not this separate person. And it's balancing the two. So we're not labeling ourselves as like, oh my God, like riddled with this, this binge eater inside me. But it's being able to go, I am an autonomous, responsible person that can make better decisions. I just have to get myself feeling more like the true version of myself, where I'm not just letting my impulses run the show. I'm not just letting this tully version of me run the show. It's actually me. But how do I get myself to feel more like me, as opposed to just operating off of like this impulsive creature within me?
Yes. And it's super interesting what you sort of say, to take responsibility and to not sort of rely on that, oh, this doesn't feel like me, because I feel like the more sessions we did and the more we went down that journey, how I used to cope by using her, it faded. And like, that was sort of my initial coping mechanism. But the work that we did, the strategies we started to employ, like, that was all me doing the work to take control of those behaviors I thought was her, but it was me. And like, I didn't refer to her again, I don't think, for ages, because I had then learned how to control, my behavior and what I was doing.
100%. And I think that's such an important thing to pull out, is like that responsibility piece, to go, if we're gonna, I always say, right, if we're gonna take responsibility for like when things are going really well and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm such a badass, it's like, then we also want to take responsibility for when things aren't going so well. But then it's the same flip side, like the reverse also is the same. It's like, if we're taking responsibility and being so self-berating when things don't go well, okay, well, you also have to learn how to celebrate the weeks that do go really well, where you're making really great choices. And we tend, right, I was speaking about this morning on a call, it's like we tend to speak in absolutes, whereas like one thing goes terrible and we're like, oh my God, I'm a terrible human and I'm a binge eater and all these things, and like we just create this big story. But then when things are amazing, we're like, I'm so in control. And it's like learning how to be discerning and being able to, learning how to be discerning and being able to take responsibility. But then also, I think what I'm trying to get at here is also then having that degree of like compassion and finding that middle ground of like taking responsibility, having compassion for realizing that you are a human. That is an impulsive thing. We are emotional, like we were saying before. But again, coming back to that word harness, it's learning how to like feel your impulses, feel your feelings, and then make more intentional decisions off the back of that you own. And then like, we're not always going to make great choices. Like, we're not always going to take the most aligned action. Like, sometimes we're going to have mindless moments of food. Sometimes you are going to overeat some moments, but it's about learning how can you become a human that has less unintentional moments. But then also you can accept the fact that, sometimes you get distracted. Sometimes you just want to have seconds and you're like, oh, I totally wasn't that hungry for that. But being able to steer yourself back and to just relax back into your rhythm.
That's it. That's the power. It's like letting yourself go if you want to, giving yourself permission to do that. And when I say letting yourself go, it's like, as you say, going back for seconds or having that second chocolate bar, whatever it might be. But it's how do you then bring yourself back to the center to be able to realign and keep going. And I think like we are perfectionists. Like I get that. I feel like a lot of us in this space are, but I also find comfort in thinking, well, okay, we're perfectionists, but more often than not, we actually aren't. But how boring would it be if everything was perfect? If, we stuck to our diet, we stuck to our eating plan day in, day out. How boring is that? Like, yeah, like I actually want to go back for seconds someday because the cake is that good. Or I do want to go out for ice cream after I've had burgers because my friends want to, and I want to have that special moment with them. Like that is what life is all about. Like I actually don't want it to be perfect every day because there is no fun in that. And I think that is the beauty of being able to come to that realization where it's like, actually, I do have the power to make those decisions, and I do have the power to go off track when I want to, but then also realign with my values too and come back to what I want to achieve. So I think that's really important to sort of think about.
So important. And being able to, like, because I know there'll be some people listening, right, that are like, yeah, but like I want to lose weight and I want to focus on, physique goals and that kind of stuff. And like, so hearing that, right, like we all know what it feels like off the back, especially if I'm seeing women that are like off the back of binging and emotional eating. Maybe you've gained a couple of kilos, maybe you're like me and gained 30 kilos, like whatever it looks like. But so it comes back to going like, what stage am I at right now though? And what's going to be most conducive to me getting going on my goals, right? And it is about recognizing that, if you keep trying to go into a deficit, let's say, and you notice that you literally keep emotionally eating and feeling like you want to blow out, okay, great. You need to solve that problem, which is going to actually end up being a catalyst to then you being able to lose the weight and all the things. And then I think what I wanted to specifically zero in on what you just said there, Tay, is also being able to see that, you're also going to go through phases, right? Like in terms of, even for myself now, it's like I go through phases where I'm leaner and I'm like a bit more refined with my eating, but then I also go through phases like social events or holidays where I'm like, this is what life is about. I'm not meant to be X amount of body fat percentage every single day of the year. And I think people have this wrong idea of like thinking that everything they see on social media, that like you should look that exact same way all year round. And it's like, yes, to a certain degree. And everyone has, I always say, it's like we have a range where we feel comfortable in, and you might, some people's is larger than others, but you want to give yourself a degree of flexibility so that you can actually have food freedom, which is a way of life essentially, where you still know that you're never really restricted. And you can definitely have these moments where you go out for frozen yogurt with your girlfriend, and you can go out for dinner with your partner and be like, I can say yes to the entree and the dessert. And yes, he wants the creme brulee and I'm also going to get the chocolate mousse. And that is okay because I'm also not going to do this every single day. So it's not something that's going to completely derail me. But when we think that it does, we end up having it, feeling guilty, binging as a result, restricting the next day, and we just get completely stuck in that binge restrict cycle again.
I totally agree. And maybe it's helpful for me to share sort of my journey of when I started with you and the phase that I wanted to go through.
Please. That's my next question. Yeah.
So I remember, I think I was 5 or so kilos heavier than what I wanted, what that desirable goal weight for me was. And I came to you wanting to lose weight. And of course, there was an element, or the biggest element being I wanted to heal my relationship with food. But I sort of had the intention of being able to do this while tracking my calories. And look, tracking for me has never been a good thing. It worked when I first started using it because I thought, oh my God, like this is just amazing. Like I just need to count how much food I have and put it in this calculator and then I'm good. But for me, it then became this obsessive thing where if I wasn't hitting that particular number, I'd spiral and all these sorts of things. And as a result, like I became heavier because I lost control and that particular method was not serving me. So fast forward to then you, I was like, okay, well, how can I do this? How can I heal my food, and how can I heal my relationship with food, and also lose the weight? And we had a very honest conversation. What I think I really loved was how you validated the fact, and as you just sort of talked about before, like, you can absolutely have the goal to lose weight. There is nothing wrong with that. Like, that is amazing. We all go through those periods, and it's healthy to actually have a goal and work towards something. But to be able to do that and to know, your past history around tracking, and you can do it without tracking, I would strongly sort of advise against that. And look, I trusted you, and I wanted to trust the process, and we absolutely did that. So part of that was really leaning into that intuitive eating process, and I was, God, I was scared. I was so scared to do it. I thought, oh my God, if I've put on weight by tracking, because like there are moments where I've lost.
What's going to happen when I'm intuitively eating? And
Exactly.
Yeah.
But my weight stabilized, and I think we did that for, I think it was about 4 or so months. So October through to early in the new year. And what I found most fascinating was Christmas for me was always a, I think for many of us, there are particular milestones throughout the year that really, give us some elements of scareness, and we get quite, I guess, concerned with how we're going to manage it. And Christmas was one of them. But I took the approach to lean into my physical hunger. So was I actually hungry? Or is this psychological hunger? Is this me thinking I'm hungry, but I'm actually not? And for me, that was probably one of the methods that we talked about that really resonated with me and worked for me. And I think I went into that particular period knowing that I wanted to be present with my family. I wanted to enjoy myself and ensure I came out of that festive season feeling like I really enjoyed myself, and I didn't want to go straight into a diet, which was me year after year. And we successfully did that. I remember we still had a call, I think it was 2 days after Christmas, because you're amazing. And we talked about how I handled Christmas, and I didn't get that heightened feeling. I wasn't scared going into it because we had done some prep work. And I felt like I had been set up for success, and I was fully backing myself. Like, I knew I could do it, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. And I did. And I think then going into the new year, like I thought, okay, maybe now I could try going into a fat loss phase or a deficit phase. And I think actually we did try doing that a couple of times, but it wasn't necessarily working for me, because that mentality of trying to lose weight and putting that pressure on myself, it just wasn't setting me up for success. It didn't end up doing that, and we just sort of focused on managing my weight and intuitive eating. And what I started to realize is I was integrating those snacks that I previously demonized, and I was listening to my hunger cues. And honestly, over the last 6 or so months or whatever it's been, the weight has actually dropped off. Like you and I got to a point where I thought I could now do this on my own. And I remember that call that we had where I was like, I was going to break down in tears. I think we did a couple of times, or I did. I felt so sad to be parting with you, because the journey you had been on with me was just one of the most pivotal moments of my life, where I have learned all about myself, the things that triggers me, the things that can set me up for success. And to be able to be at this point now where it has all happened organically and it has worked out exactly as you said it would, is just the most liberating feeling. And I think one of the key things I want to say is I went into this process, or all my life I have thought about reaching this utopia where I would be healed or I would be recovered, as I sort of mentioned earlier, which I don't agree with now, because what I've realized is recovery for me, if people are going to throw that word around, is not binge eating again. It's being able to feel those feelings. It's being able to manage those triggers and to acknowledge that they're there and have the power to be able to choose what you want with it. And I'm happy to share that I still have moments where I feel those feelings and I do feel myself going to the fridge, or I do feel myself going to the pantry. And to be honest, there are some days where I actually give myself permission to do that, because I know it's going to actually give me the satisfaction I want. And I think it's okay to sometimes lean back into that old comfort zone. Like I really do still see a purpose in that sometimes. But the fact that I now have the control to be able to choose how I will action that situation is something I never thought I'd be able to do. And it's not until I've been at this point I truly realized that, like, that to me is the ultimate utopia. It's not never binging again. It's really giving myself the power and control to be able to do what I want.
That is so powerful what you've just said, because I absolutely agree. People have this idea that it's getting to this place where one of the biggest things I hear is like, I just don't want to think about food like ever again. I'm like, guys, babe, everyone listening, we still have to eat literally till the day that we die. And food is a beautiful part of life. It is the thing that brings people together. It's the thing that any of your family memories or your favorite like relationship moments, there's probably a meal sitting between the two of you guys, or sitting between you and your family. Like, food is always going to be there, and it's a beautiful thing, but not when we feel like it's controlling you. And when you get back into a position where you can have a stressful week at work and come home and be like, you know what, I actually do want to have a whole bag of popcorn, and being like, I'm actually allowed to have that, and I can follow it up with a Magnum if I want to, but it's my choice. And I also know all these other things that I can do that I probably will also do, like having a bath and getting in my PJs and putting a candle on and all these great things. But I also can have some comfort food, but it comes from a place of control, as opposed to then you smashing that and then feeling guilty and then having 4 Magnums and then going the next day and having him and all of these things, and then feeling like an awful person, because that wasn't in alignment and you didn't feel in control, as opposed to making very aware choices. And this guys is genuinely speaking to like this whole idea, right, of like, I always think food freedom is it's not just like a place you get to, it's more of a mindset. It's a way of life where you're like, I actually feel free with food, free to make choices that either align, let's say, with physique goals that I have, but I still feel in control, or they align with a bit more of like a flexible phase right now, but I'm still the one making the choice. I'm not being dictated by food rules. I'm not feeling like someone is telling me to go have something that I don't want to have, or telling me not to have something that I should. It's like, so just coming back to that, it's like food gets to be comfort. Food gets to be beautiful. And your meals aren't supposed to just be steak and rice. And if that's what you love, amazing. Also, if you have physique goals and that's what you're happy to do, amazing. But if you feel restricted in having that, if you feel as though you're following a food rule, or you're just having it because someone else told you to have that, like, that's not food freedom. But food freedom also doesn't mean just eating whatever you want whenever you want, just cause, and like, oh my God, well, this is like, you know, this is a whole idea of like intuitive eating. People fear the weight gain that even you were mentioning, right, Tay? It's like we end up fearing intuitive eating, and I was very much the same, because you think, and we've kind of been told, intuitive eating equals food freedom, equals almost like just fully sending it, having the pastry every day. And that's not the case, because you probably don't want the pastry every single day. You might, but you probably don't. And when you start to tune into, what is my hunger saying? What is my fullness saying? And also, what aligns with the very best version of me? What does she look like? What does she feel like? How does she think? How does she manage her stress? When you actually start stepping into her, you realize that food gets to play a beautiful part in your life, but there's all these other things as well that also can help you cope and manage with heightened moments and things like that. Something else I want to touch on there, Tate, that you mentioned is like not demonizing weight loss. And I really want to celebrate that, because I think that is something that is demonized and is kind of told that so many women come to me, right, and they'll say that, well, I've been told that I'm never going to be able to diet ever again. And it makes them feel completely stuck, because for the majority of the women that I work with, and as for yourself, as for myself, it's like, well, I still want to feel amazing, and I still want to be able to pull on my favorite jeans and feel great and feel comfortable in my skin. And no, I'm not here to be like shredded as hell, but I'm here to feel really happy in my skin and comfortable. And you're allowed to want that too. It's about thinking about, how am I going to get there in a way that's still going to make sure that my mental and my emotional health is taken care of, as well as my physical health, and what's going to be the most conducive for me, because that's going to look different for everyone.
And I actually think that that's something that not a lot of people talk about. Like, how can you do both successfully? How can you heal your relationship with food and still work towards your goals? And look, it's going to be a different journey for everyone, but I think that messaging to me just doesn't really exist. And I think that that was probably one of the key things that I really heard when I spoke to you and I heard your podcast, is like that to me is the approach. Like, that to me is what success looks like, is having the best of both worlds, which is absolutely attainable. But I think with social media and sort of all the things that we see, like, that's not what people talk about. It's like, if you want a fat loss goal, like, it's going to be bloody hard, and you sort of anticipate that it's not going to be an enjoyable process. Or if you want to heal your relationship with food, then, as you say, like, for a lot of people, it's food freedom with eating whatever you want. And that's not setting you up for success. That's not how it should be. But there's that middle of the two of them, which we've been able to do so successfully. And as a result, like, my life couldn't be better for it. Like, for example, this morning I went out for breakfast with my mum. I had a massive plate of scrambled eggs, a nice big coffee, but I went for a walk this morning and I got my steps in, and the steps thing, look, that's something else. I don't necessarily hit a target of 10,000 steps a day anymore, because for me that was quite triggering, and I just make sure that I move my body as much as I can, and I enjoy moving my body in whatever capacity that is. And this afternoon I'm actually going out for yochi, and I load my yochi right up with absolutely everything. But like, this week has been quite a healthy balance of a week for me. So I know that I can enjoy today and lean out of that sort of linear path that I sort of create for myself, and lean into those snacks, knowing that tomorrow I'll come back into the middle of where I need to be and center myself. So being able to have the capacity to do that now, and for that to happen quite organically, I never thought that I'd get to this point. And I think that that's something that I really look back on and am able to celebrate the success of that.
100%. So beautiful. And to what you were saying before, right? Like, that's what life is about. It's being able to say yes to those moments without it being triggering, without it being a sense of, oh my God, I'm going to have to restrict tomorrow, or I have to restrict today, or I can't go, or I can't. It's learning, like, how can I fit that in? Because you can fit it into a beautiful balance. And when we do, no binge has to happen as an effect of that. How would you describe your relationship with yourself now?
I feel so comfortable in my skin. I feel confident, and I feel completely self-aware. I always felt I was quite in tune with who I was. But I think having done the work that we did, it sort of dug a little deeper into some of those things I don't think I had really unpacked for myself, and has brought about this other sense of awareness. And I think what's really beautiful about that is I've been able to have these conversations with friends and family members and feel comfortable sharing the work and the journey I've been on. And I think if we hadn't done what we did, I wouldn't have been in a position to do that. And I think what's really quite, I don't know if it's concerning or just something that I've made an observation about, is this sort of thing is everywhere. I don't think anyone really has this, I don't know, 100% view of their body and their relationship with food as being perfect. I think everyone, to some extent, I don't want to say struggles with disordered eating, but it's something that I think people think about. Like, people think about what they're eating on a daily basis, and if they should be having this or if they should be having that. To me, what this has also brought about is, like, I don't think anyone's sort of isolated in that regard. Like, it is everywhere. And I think, sort of coming back to the social media thing, and I hate saying it, but it is everywhere. Like, we're constantly looking at other people and their bodies, or what, you know, they're eating in a day, or what their day on a plate looks like. And, like, it's hard for us as humans in this society to be able to block that out completely and not think about food, and to be at a point now where I feel really content. It's now being able to have those conversations with other women and even other men, and really hear what they're thinking and sort of what their mentality and relationship with food is like. And the really underlying thing is like we all sort of think and feel the same way. For some of us, it comes out in different ways, like binge eating or restricting or whatever it might be. But I think to be able to be in a place now where I have learned the tools and the strategies that have really set me up for success, I feel empowered now to be able to take that further and help other people in a similar capacity, and just feel as though they're heard too.
So powerful. And I think so many women that I chat to as well have that exact same intention of like also wanting to help women heal. And if anyone right now is listening to this being like, you know, you're really wanting to get into this space, biggest thing, right, that you want to focus on is like heal yourself first, and then get yourself to a place where you actually feel like I'm 100% comfortable with everything that I do, everything that I think, you know, the good and the bad, and I understand my triggers, and I understand you're in this solid place, because when you're in that place, you can then actually, not only will you naturally become magnetizing and naturally inspire the people in your life and actually elevate all facets of your own life and of those that are in contact with you, but then you're in a really healthy place to then also be able to go, I can actually step into a space of wanting to project this even further. And that's a really special place to get to, but we can't do that until you've actually been through that own healing journey yourself. And that, you know, for everyone that's wanting to impact, even like, let's say, for instance, you want to impact your daughter or you want to impact your partner, it's like you have to then focus, like this is where you have to be selfish and actually go, I need to focus on myself and put my blinders on. And when you do that, it's going to naturally have this flow on effect as well, which is super special. Something I want to ask you, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, lucky girl syndrome, because there will be people listening to you thinking that Taylor is so lucky though. Like she probably just has this great mindset and she probably is this special snowflake that just was different to me because my life is way harder than hers, or, you know, all of those narratives that I also used to have. What would you want to say to that person that thinks that they're going to be different?
It's so funny when you say she's so lucky. My mind automatically goes to that Britney Spears song, She's So Lucky. I by no means am special. I think I alluded to this earlier, like there's been countless times where I have felt setbacks and I have been angry and disappointed with myself because I haven't yet healed. And it's been years to get to this point. I'm 31 and this has been going on since I was a young girl. And I think it's really getting to that point where, and look, I know a lot of us go through it multiple times and we think, okay, this is the time I want to change. This is the time I'm going to stop binge eating. But it's really getting to that point where you feel like you've found the right person to be able to help you. And giving yourself the permission to lean in, feel the discomfort, feel the fear, as we talked about earlier, and really trust the process. And I think recognize that it's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take time. And I think all beautiful things in life do take time. So I'm not lucky. I've just been able to give myself, I guess, the grace to go through this process and trust that one way or the other, it'll work out for me. And I've just backed myself. Like I just had to get to a point where I needed to do this for myself. And I think as well, we sort of talked about this before, is, you know, accepting that there will be setbacks and not every week is going to be perfect because we don't want it to be perfect. I think it's celebrating the small wins, which I think you and I did quite a bit. I think we looked at, you know, my week on reflection, and there were moments that weren't great, but there were also moments that we could sort of see the spotlight in and really hone in on those. And they're the things that add up over time. So that's probably something that I'd encourage everyone to do, is look back on your weeks or sort of look at your day and see where there were those glory moments, because they're actually, I think, the little nuggets that build that confidence and sort of build that sort of foundation for you to get to where you need to get to. So I'm not lucky. I feel blessed to be able to have gone through the process, and Sherry has been that person for me.
So much love for you. And because you're exactly right. It's being able to celebrate the good and acknowledge the not so good, and allow ourselves to notice that the good is also signs that things are changing, as opposed to, right, it's cognitive bias. We just look at the stuff that's not going well and we're like, right, we speak in absolutes and we're like, oh, my week was terrible, and we give ourselves zero credit for all the good stuff. And that is, like, without a doubt, like, job number one in my role is being able to go, hey, you're actually looking at the 5% that didn't go right, and you're forgetting the 95% where you actually stepped up every single time. And like, learning how to speak to ourselves differently about that. And it's not to say, right, everything's positive, because absolutely it's not, but being able to then, it allows us then to go in to unpack the challenges and be like, cool, let's actually realize it. Cool, you didn't act in alignment there. Awesome. Why is that? Let's get curious, and we can step through it. And those moments have to happen, exactly like you said. Like, those moments teach us, interesting, what came up in that moment? How curious that we can get to know a certain facet of who it is that you are. How exciting.
And I think as well, like, it's something we haven't really touched on is, well, we did touch on sort of feeling validated, but one thing we haven't touched on is this judgment piece, like removing any sort of judgment from yourself, but also the conversations that you and I had. I think that was really key, because you never made me feel like I was doing the wrong thing or I shouldn't have done this. And it was a safe space. And that is, again, the foundation for you to sort of feel heard and listened to, and for you to sort of show up however you may be feeling that day or the following day, and know that it's okay. And if it wasn't perfect, you can continue on, and it doesn't need to set you back entirely. And I think, going back to one of your questions around, the benefit of coaching and having a coach, like, that to me is the purpose of a coach. Like, your role in that is so different to what a psychologist or a nutritionist can play. And I think that that's where that added value really comes in.
100%. Yeah, it's like coming back to, you need strategy, but you need support, right? And they're two very different things. And so many people get given a certain strategy, which I always like. A lot of the strategies out there aren't the greatest, but we get strategy, and then this is why coaching is so different, is because, like, I believe this is why all the girls get the results like what you've had, is it's about when things do get challenging, because let's not beat around the bush. Like, there will be moments that feel really freaking challenging, especially at the beginning, when we're stuck in habit loops that don't serve us, when we want to just repeat back what feels familiar, and there's a part of you that wants to just fully send it and hit the fucker button and eat the entire block of Kit Kat. It's like, in that moment, what are we going to do? And actually having someone that can help you through that, help you actually notice the wobble, understand what happened, and step you through, like, that is without a doubt, like, a strategy can't, like, a downloadable ebook is not going to help you, right? It's like, sometimes the only thing through that is actually feeling coached and supported, and then given tools and strategies to help you move through it, so that next time that urge, you're 10 times more self-aware in that moment. And then the time after that, you're again 10 times more self-aware, so that you work through the challenge, because that's exactly what it takes. And just to, like, finish up on this as well, I listened to a podcast this morning with David Goggins, and he worded it so beautifully, as beautifully as David Goggins ever says anything, with a lot of swear words in there. But he spoke to this idea that, like, it is a lifelong journey. He obviously wasn't speaking to binge eating, but the way that I understood it, especially in relation to what we're talking about today, is recovering from binge eating isn't a lifelong journey, but focusing on maintaining a relationship with food and yourself that is healthy, that is a lifelong thing. And that doesn't mean you're fixing it forever. It means you do a fix build moment, a recreation of it, a rebuild. But then you get to a point where it's not just this perfect oasis where you just never think about food again, right? Like, taking care of yourself is genuinely an everyday job. And you just become very skilled in doing that in a way that actually serves you and your life in a positive way. When we're stuck in a binge restrict cycle, we've just been trying to do it, and we're essentially loving ourselves in a very unskilled way, because it's coming out in self-sabotage. It's coming across with crossing our own boundaries, not living up to our values or our morals. But that's not for a lack of effort, right? It's about learning how to put right strategy, right support, so that then we're actually learning how to love ourselves and nurture ourselves better. And that's literally a daily job to the day that you die. And that does take effort, and it does take time and attention, but it's about choosing to realize that you're actually worthy of all of that same love and attention that we tend to give to our work, to our partners, to our life, but we don't tend to give it to ourselves. But the moment that you do, it has this complete halo effect over everything and everyone else in your life.
And I think, like, back to the privilege piece, like, what a privilege it is to be able to do that, to be able to work on yourself in that way. Like, you know, there are so many people who aren't in a position to do that. And I think if you then are able to and have the power to do it, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do it? Yeah, go David Goggins.
Is there any last words you have for everyone listening?
I think I'd just say to be brave. I think, you know, life is crazy for a lot of us, and, you know, the world is crazy. But I think be brave in what you're trying to achieve, and realize it's not linear. Cut yourself some slack. You know, embrace the downfalls, but also, you know, pick yourself back up and keep going. And I know that that feels tiring at times, but it gets to a point where you do realize enough is enough. And when you find your person, like what I did with Sherry, and this isn't me just trying to sell Sherry's service, but she honestly changed my life. And look, I have reflected on this multiple times, and I've teared up, and I'm going to tear up now, but I wouldn't be where I am today without her. And anyone in a similar position, I would just say, really put yourself first and give it as much thought as you can to be able to get yourself to that point and put in the hard work. And I know anyone in this position is capable of doing that, because, as I mentioned before, we're all really special people, and you will get there.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know there's going to be hundreds, thousands of people that listen to this and finally feel heard, seen, valued, supported, and actually see the light at the end of the tunnel. And it's all because you're brave before, but you're brave now, being able to share it and inspiring a whole bunch of other people to be like, maybe I could do it too. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.